My name is Attorney Lucy Rivera, and welcome to 2022. It is a pleasure to bring you Discovering the Law through BNN Studios. Today, we have a very interesting topic, very appropriate for 2022, environmental law. And for that, we are bringing Attorney Daniel Deutsch. Dan earned his JD degree from Boston University Law School in 1986. And he is a member of the bar of the New Hampshire State and Massachusetts. And he practices in state, federal courts, and all the trial courts, appeals courts, and various agencies. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Lucy. So I've been practicing law for about 35 years, and in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire, as you indicated. My practice is primarily litigation or trial law. I practice in some other areas as well. It's very diverse, runs the gamut. Environmental law is high on that list.
Thank you, Dan. So we're here to listen and to learn about environmental law. Dan, how did you become interested in environmental law, and why does it still interest you?
Well, Lucy, I grew up in the south side of Chicago and Gary, Indiana, the industrial heartland of the United States. And Gary is known for, among other things, of course, Michael Jackson, and also the steel mills and the pollution from the steel mills. And the steel mills were important to develop a huge, wonderful economy in the Midwest, but they generate a lot of pollution, which makes for beautiful sunsets, all the particles in the air, but mostly is a health risk for lots of folks. And so I became concerned about environment in my youth, and also working in summers in a small family business, which was paint making business, which despite best efforts got caught up in some problems for the cleanup of a contaminated site, because a contractor basically dumped some chemicals they weren't supposed to. And environmental law, it really is a fascinating area because it's important to all of us who breathe the same air, the same water. And the tools of environmental law allow me to help my clients work toward their goals in life without getting caught up in what is a really complicated thicket of rules and regulations.
But then what do we mean by environmental law?
That's a good question. So environmental law, I would say, is the system of rules and regulations that govern and manage what we can do and how we can do things that affect our natural resources, land, air, water. Basically, environmental law is like a referee when it comes to scarce resources. You know, Americans are always been explorers, innovators, inventors, and we've built a tremendous economy, and we can be proud of ourselves for that. But when the resources are plentiful, we don't really need rules to govern what we do so much, and disputes, because anything goes, the Wild West. But over time, we bumped up against one another, people against other people, farmers, ranchers, businesses, and cities, and so forth. And we began to use those limited resources. And in fact, we became prosperous enough to care about our health and how our actions affected us and one another. That came to a head in the 1960s and 70s, really, when science told us more about our health and how things affect us, cigarettes, lead and gasoline, and so forth. And the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which is the primary federal agency governing environmental laws in this country, was founded in the early 1970s. And steel mills had to clean up their act and so forth. And a whole area of environmental law grew up around that.
Thank you, Dan. Why do we care about regulations in environmental law?
Lucy, I would say that there are three primary reasons. One is self-interest. We're human beings, we're businesses, we're homeowners. We care naturally about what we can do, the efficiency of it, and that we be able to do it without too much legal risk in owning our homes, running our businesses, and living our lives. And the second is, I would say, practical and social. We are social beings, we live in communities, and we want and need to care about how our actions impact one another. And the third is moral, both from the standpoint of affecting other people and the earth, say Mother Earth or the Creator, but also what we leave behind for our children and grandchildren.
Yes, indeed. In this field, mostly there are different regulatory areas. I guess many areas of the law are tied up with the environment, correct?
Oh yeah, great.
And what are they?
Well, there are a number. Environmental law really affects us in so many ways. There's contract law and corporate and business law, real estate transactions, bankruptcy law, criminal law. All of these really are tied up in municipal law. I can give you a few examples. So you want to build a house, you will be restricted in where you do it in relation to the natural resources, wetlands, and so forth that surround it. If you go to sell a house, the buyer may be concerned with asbestos. You run a business and you vent steam from your business, you have to comply with certain laws in that regard, clean air. When you sell the business, you've got to certify the condition of the land and the property. And all of these actions implicate different kinds of environmental law, real estate law, corporate and business law, even criminal laws. And so when we consider what we do and how we do it, we have to plan around both the other private parties that are involved and the government, both.
So this field is mostly about different state laws or federal laws?
It's a good question. Really both. And I would say sometimes at the same time. We have in this country, of course, what's known as federalism. And so you have a top-down structure of central or federal government, and beneath it, state government, and beneath that, local government. And each of them plays some role in managing and regulating our affairs when it comes to their effects on the environment. There is a doctrine of preemption, which as an attorney, I know you're aware of, our viewers may not. And sometimes there are priorities in policy making for the federal government. Railroads, for example, were so important to the growth of this country and the economy that they were given special protection in our federal laws. And so, for example, the Surface Transportation Board has special authority in regulating activities that are integral to the use of railroads. So, for example, a waste transfer station that's based on rail will be regulated entirely exclusively by that federal agency. And there are tensions between the federal and the state and local authorities in the area of environmental law.
But how do these government authorities manage activities that affect the environment?
Well, traditionally they do it in three ways. Again, the magic number 3. So they do it first of all by setting the rules of what I would call the rules of the game. So you have statutes, or in the case of local government, bylaws, and the regulations that implement them. The second way that they manage and regulate is through permitting, the issuance of permits. You know the expression, hold your friends close and your enemies closer. So permits establish conditions to regulate how we do certain activities. And those conditions create a relationship really with the government, an opportunity for the government to observe and control, keep track of what we're up to. And finally, enforcement. And here is where the authorities will monitor and take action in courts or agencies to enforce compliance with a permit or with the law in the absence of a permit. And that can be through an agency or like the DEP would be the primary agency, Department of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts, or the EPA in the federal government. or through local boards and committees in the case of towns and cities.
Interesting, very true. Would you describe a few types of environmental regulations?
Well, there's so many. It's said that the list of agencies is like alphabet soup, A to Z. And the regulations and statutes are numerous, but I'll give you a few examples. As some viewers may know, what's called Chapter 21E in Massachusetts is the statute that prohibits release or dumping of hazardous materials or oil into the environment, and actually makes people and businesses strictly liable without proof of fault if they own or operate a business or place where oil or hazardous waste are released, and also governs the process for cleaning them up. So that's one example. Another would be, say, wetlands regulated by local conservation commissions under state law, and solid waste under both state and federal law with the Superfund statutes.
So when there are disputes between citizens, between businesses or government, how do they get resolved?
Well, right. So it really depends on the nature of the problem, but they can be resolved either by agreement, a contract between neighbors, for example, or a business and another business, or agreement between a business or individual and the government. In the case of the federal government or state government, it's often called an administrative consent order. It's a contract that's enforceable in court. Or if not by agreement, then in court. For example, neighbors may sue one another for water that's redirected onto their property. Citizens may appeal the issuance of a permit to a business or for a new development around them. Governments may take enforcement actions in court. Another is before administrative agencies, which hold hearings based on scientific evidence, facts, and expert testimony. And these each have pros and cons, and sometimes one will actually lead to another. A hearing will lead to court and so forth.
So I think what you're leading us to is to say that is there such a thing as an environmental court?
That's a great question, Lucy. You know, I've thought about this a great deal. There really is not. We have the land court. In Massachusetts, we have land court. We have housing court. In some states, they have the drug court. In Massachusetts, at least, there is no environmental court. And as a result, the judges come with different experience. Some will have more experience that's relevant to these issues than others. And it falls on the lawyer to educate the judge about the relevant areas of science.
In addition to attorneys, what type of professionals are they also involved with working with environmental issues and environmental laws?
Well, attorneys aren't the only players in this game, if you will. I work with engineers, wetland scientists, botanists, hydrogeologists, geotechnical scientists. There are a number of different experts, and each plays a number of roles. One is to give advice to the attorneys and to clients about the activities that they've taken or proposed to take, whether a business or an individual. Another is to actually help to prepare the applications for permits. A third is to testify in court or at a hearing to present the science and the facts in a way that a jury or judge or agency will understand and appreciate. They also manage the processes like cleaning up of waste sites and so forth, or remedying problems when they exist on the ground.
Then talk to us a little bit about the different cases that you have handled in environmental law. This area is very broad and fascinating. Tell us about your experience.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, among them is representing a small business that was a defense contractor. And there's an older gentleman who found himself pouring certain liquids into the sink in his own business property. And he was pursued for criminal charges in the federal court of the United States, and had never been done before. And the law was not well defined. We represented him, we brought an appeal, and we exonerated him. Another would be I was involved in representing one of the parties in a very complicated a case where a subdivision was created and the properties were sold off to homeowners, only to find that there was contamination in the soils of the properties. Many different parties were brought into the case. I've also represented municipalities and wetland enforcement and wetland appeals, but also private parties in those matters too. These are just a handful of the kinds of cases and matters I've been involved with.
Thank you. For our viewers, today we are learning about environmental law with Dan Deutsch, and he is here to tell us a little bit more about his cases and about his experience in the field. Dan, are environmental laws keeping up with changes in society, and what are some of these hot topics in the environmental law field?
It is an area that, as much or more than any other area of law, is undergoing a lot of change. It's remarkable how much. And we see the environment changing, and businesses can attest that they're subject to all kinds of rules. For the most part, they're keeping up. Say, for example, hot areas, climate change. In Boston, we see recently new zoning rules, flood control rules, and green building requirements in that area. There's a Supreme Court case the court will hear next month, West Virginia versus EPA, that concerns the authority and the limits on authority of the EPA to make rules that dictate what power sources can be used by the power industry in West Virginia. It's very controversial and important. But we have also renewable energy and sustainability, which is an important new area that's getting a lot of attention on the part of regulators and businesses as well.
Now, if one of our viewers encounters a problem involving an environmental issue, say a chemical contamination or land, what are some of the things that they need to know from the start, or where to go, or what to do?
Sure. Well, this is an excellent question because so much can be achieved if you move in the right direction with the right people, and so much can be lost if you don't. I would say there are about 5 or 6 important steps. One is it's important to find and consult with an attorney who has enough of the right experience to help you, or if not, to steer you in the right direction, someone who can, and do it early. The second is to collect all relevant documents and information or records. It's easy to lose track of, especially electronic records. The third would be to educate yourself. That is, read up relevant materials online, ask people about their experiences, and ask questions of the attorney. The attorney should be prepared to work with you. The fourth is to be creative, to look at all the angles, financial, legal, and business angles. Next, I would say, be creative and open-minded about solutions. There are many different ways to resolve environmental issues with courts, other parties, agencies. And finally, check on insurance coverage. You can lose the coverage if you don't consult the insurance carrier right away. Give them notice and cooperate with them.
Dan, we have about 10 minutes to go, but I wanted to tell the public and everyone watching this episode that today we're talking with Daniel Deutsch. He is the principal and co-managing attorney. Dan, could you please, of your law firm, Brooks DeRensis.
That's right.
I'm sorry about that. Dan, can you visit a little bit about the process, the steps in the administrative proceeding and in court cases for environmental law? You alluded a little bit about the permits and application. Tell us about the steps as to how anyone can bring some sort of litigation in environmental law.
Okay, well, I would say there are 2 things. Let's talk first about permitting process. As I say, permits are necessary to establish the rules for both parties, for the applicant who wants and needs to take certain actions in their life, their home, their business, their industry, or their community, and also for the government. And so the interplay between them is essential, and you want to get conditions of your permit that are helpful to you. So line up the right players and make that happen. Notice must be given to the interested parties, whether neighbors and abutters, other businesses, government agencies, and then a hearing is held. And environmental law depends so much on science. And the hearing is the process by which the decision maker will receive and act on the relevant information in science. And then a decision has to be made in writing for good government, and so that there is a basis for a court to decide whether the action taken was appropriate on appeal. The record that's established is really the basis for the court to decide it. In courts, not everybody can appeal a decision. There's something called legal standing. You must demonstrate that you will be specially affected and affected differently than other parties, so that you can ante up, get a place at the table, and have your voice heard in court.
Thank you, Dan. You did talk a little bit about that there's not such a thing as environmental court in light of the facts that different states have their own laws.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about the conflict, the deference. Who wins if one state has certain application for the environmental laws over other states? Tell us about the review process, the appeal review by court. How do lawyers educate judges?
Yes. So as they say, there is no such thing as an environmental court. Whether you're in land court, where judges are more familiar with these issues, or in superior court, where they may or may not, or in federal court, where you also will have sophisticated judges, some of whom have experience and some do not in this area. It really falls to the attorney to distill and educate the court on the issues. The courts are not experts, which means they have to, by law, pay deference or give a lot of leeway to the agencies that have made the decision that's under review. Now, they're not going to just give them a free pass, but they have to assume that the agencies and the boards will have specialized knowledge and are in the best position to make decisions based on the science they receive. Having said that, there are standards for reviewing the decisions to decide whether they're reasonable in light of that evidence, and the arguments are made by the attorneys who are armed with the information and the experts to do that.
Wonderful, very interesting, Dan. We do have 5 minutes, and I wanted to ask you, you are the principal and co-managing attorney of Brooks DeRensis. Tell us a little bit about that big responsibility at your law firm.
Well, I appreciate that. Lucia, I'm from the Midwest originally. Went to Cornell University undergraduate, and then I worked in the family business in the Midwest for a few years. And then did my law degree at Boston University. I'm very much involved with the Alumni Association there at the law school. I worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, the federal prosecutor, as a law clerk for about 1.5 years before graduating law school, and worked for a firm in Southern New Hampshire, and was admitted to court there, and then into Boston. I've been in Boston practicing since 1988. We were a firm known as Deutsch for many years, and then 5 years ago, we formed Brooks DeRensis. We're at 260 Franklin Street. We have a very broad practice, including encompassing litigation, civil and white-collar criminal litigation, business law, real estate, commercial and residential real estate, probate, immigration, criminal law. And so I have some involvement in each of these areas, both from the standpoint of the cases that I handle, including those touching on environmental law, and from the standpoint of helping to manage the practice. It's very rewarding and interesting work.
Thank you so much, Dan. You are very knowledgeable in environmental law, an incredibly interesting topic. There is so much to it. Unfortunately, we have 2 minutes left, I believe, maybe even less to finish the program. Tell us in 1 minute, what are the takeaways for environmental law? What would you like to see in this field?
Well, I think an environmental court on some basis makes a lot of sense. It's something that hasn't received a lot of attention. As the complexity of the science increases every year, the number and variety of issues that are confronted by the communities and by the scientists and the courts increases, it is becoming increasingly hard. And I have seen judges wrestle with decisions, sometimes writing decisions of 50 pages long to evaluate all the issues here. It's a lot to ask of any judge. They often don't have the support that they might. And even with the guidance from the attorneys and the arguments from the attorneys, it's a real challenge. So if there were a way to involve judges who have some relevant experience in that process, I think it would make life much easier for everyone involved. I think also it's really important to keep an open mind, as I say, in this field, because there are a lot of different ways to negotiate resolutions of disputes with agencies and other parties. There's a lot of opportunities to solve problems. That's what it's all about.
That's correct. And that's why we love this field. Today, our guest was Daniel Deutsch. He is our first guest of 2022. Welcome to 2022. And Dan Deutsch is the principal and co-managing attorney of Brooks DeRensis. Thank you for coming to the show today, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real honor.
This episode can be viewed at www.discoveringthelaw.com, but it can also be viewed at BNN's website through, I believe, Vimeo. And till next time, my name is Attorney Lucy Rivera, and it's been my pleasure to be with you again for the first time in 2022 back home. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lucy.